Tell me what you know about this painting. You know it. You have definitely seen it. Two people standing in front of a white house with a distinctive Gothic arched window. A man holding a pitchfork. A woman standing slightly behind him and to the right. They are solemn, plain-faced, and severe. They look like they have not smiled recently and are not about to start. You probably know the painting is called American Gothic. You may know it was made in 1930 by an Iowa painter named Grant Wood. You almost certainly believe that the two figures are a husband and wife, a farming couple, standing in front of their farmhouse, representing a certain kind of American rural life that the rest of the country has been arguing about ever since. Every single one of those assumptions has a problem. They are not husband and wife. They never were. The man is her father. The house behind them is not a farmhouse. No one in this painting is a farmer. The object in the man's hand is not technically a pitchfork. Grant Wood was almost certainly a closeted gay man painting in 1930 Iowa. And once you understand that, the question of what this painting is actually doing becomes much more complicated and much more interesting than the argument it is usually enrolled in. And the woman who modeled for the younger figure saw the painting when it was finished, reportedly said it made her look like a hard-faced, grim-lipped caricature of a spinster, and spent the rest of her life being recognized as someone she felt the painting had made her into without her permission. American Gothic is not what you think it is, and what it actually is turns out to be stranger, more personal, and more contested than anything the culture war fought over it for 90 years has suggested. They are not married. Grant Wood painted American Gothic in 1930, the year it won a bronze medal at the Art Institute of Chicago, and was purchased by that institution for $300, where it has hung ever since. The two figures were modeled on his sister, Nan Wood Graham, who was 30 years old at the time, and his dentist, Dr. Byron McKeeby, who was 62. Nan and Byron McKeeby did not know each other before the painting brought them into proximity. They posed separately, not together, and the composition was assembled from separate sittings. The title describes a style of architecture, not a state of matrimony. The house in the background, a real house in Eldon, Iowa, which Wood had seen during a drive through the state and sketched from his car, is built in the Carpenter Gothic style, a 19th century American vernacular architecture that used wooden construction to imitate the pointed arches and vertical emphasis of medieval Gothic stonework. The distinctive upper window, with its pointed arch, was what caught Wood's eye. He went back the next day with a camera. When the painting was first exhibited in Chicago in 1930, the catalog did not identify the figures as husband and wife. Wood described them, when pressed, as a father and daughter, a man who had built or acquired this house, and the unmarried woman who kept it with him. The assumption of marriage, which spread immediately through the public and has persisted for nearly a century, was an assumption the painting invited but never made. Who they actually were. Nan Wood Graham spent decades after the painting's completion being recognized as the woman in American Gothic, and her feelings about this were complicated in ways she eventually documented herself. She was not a severe, humorless person. She was, by accounts of people who knew her, warm and socially engaged, someone who found the painting's public reception as a portrait of grim rural repression personally frustrating because she did not recognize herself in it. She objected to being called a farm wife when she was not a farm wife. She objected to the word spinster, which critics applied to her figure with some enthusiasm. She wrote a memoir, a long letter that was eventually published, in which she described sitting for her brother, her surprise at the result, and her decades of complicated relationship with an image of herself that was simultaneously famous and, in her view, wrong. Grant Wood's dentist, Dr. McKeeby, had a somewhat simpler relationship with the painting's fame. He posed because Wood asked him to. He appears to have found the whole thing mildly amusing, and he went back to practicing dentistry in Cedar Rapids. He died in 1950, sufficiently known in his community as the man with the pitchfork that his obituaries mentioned it. The thing in his hand. Now look at the implement the man is holding. It is regularly called a pitchfork, and in the cultural shorthand that has grown up around this painting, the pitchfork has become the defining symbol, the emblem of rural severity, of Protestant rigidity, of a certain kind of American work ethic that either represents the backbone of the nation or its narrowest and most joyless strain, depending on who is doing the talking. It is not a pitchfork. It is a steel hay fork, a three-tined tool used for handling hay with tines closer together and more parallel than those of a pitchfork. The distinction is not purely pedantic. A pitchfork is a general agricultural tool associated with farming broadly. A hay fork is a more specialized implement associated with a specific kind of agricultural labor. But here is what matters more than the taxonomy. The man holding it is not a farmer. Dr. McKeeby was a dentist. Wood chose to include this tool in the composition. He did not paint what was actually in front of him, but assembled the image deliberately, adding the hay fork as a compositional and symbolic choice. He wanted something vertical in the man's hands, something that rhymed with the vertical emphasis of the Gothic window, the white clapboard siding, the elongated proportions of the figures themselves. He wanted something that read as rural and as serious. He chose a hay fork, and the world called it a pitchfork, and the mistake calcified into fact before anyone thought to check. The Reception War. When American Gothic won its bronze medal and was reproduced in newspapers across the country in 1930, the response divided almost immediately along a fault line that has not closed since. People in the Midwest were furious. The painting was read, in Iowa and across the rural states, as an act of condescension, a coastal and urban mockery of rural life, presenting country people as dour, backward, and graceless. Letters arrived at the Art Institute. Editorials were written. The people who felt the painting was laughing at them were not wrong that the laughing was happening. Critics in Chicago and New York wrote about it with a barely concealed amusement that confirmed every suspicion the Midwest had about how it was perceived. Grant Wood was baffled and distressed by this. He said repeatedly, and with what appears to have been genuine feeling, that he was not mocking the people in the painting. He said he intended it as a tribute to the kind of resilience and integrity he associated with rural Midwestern life. He said the figures were meant to look serious, because serious people look serious. He was from Iowa himself. Cedar Rapids was his city. He had not left to become a coastal sophisticate. He had studied in Europe, yes, but he had come home. Whether Wood was telling the truth about his intentions, or whether he was telling himself a story that smoothed over something less comfortable, is a question the painting does not resolve. The secret underneath. Grant Wood never married. He had a brief, strange marriage in 1935 to a woman named Sarah Sherman Maxon, 10 years his senior, which ended in divorce. He lived for much of his adult life in close proximity to his male friends and patrons. The painters' community in Cedar Rapids was aware, in the way that small communities are aware of things they do not discuss openly, of Wood's sexuality. He was careful. He was discreet. He was living in Iowa in the 1930s, where the consequences of being anything other than careful and discreet would have been severe. What this context adds to American Gothic is not a simple decoding of the image. It is not the case that the painting is secretly a gay manifesto, or that the two figures represent something other than what Wood said they represented. But it is the case that a gay man living under the requirement of permanent concealment, painting two figures who are identified by the public as husband and wife but are not, depicting a kind of American life he was required to perform but could not fully inhabit. That man was not making a neutral image. The figures in American Gothic are holding their faces still. They are standing correctly. They are presenting a surface that is appropriate, contained, and impossible to read past. They are performing exactly what is required of them in front of a house that represents everything they are supposed to want. And underneath that performance, the painting offers nothing. It does not tell you whether they are content. It does not tell you whether they are suffering. It presents the performance and stops. A man who understood the cost of performance, who had spent his career maintaining one, who could not paint his own interior life directly without losing everything that gave him stability. That man might paint exactly this image and mean something by the blankness of those faces that he could not say out loud. What Nan thought. Nan Wood Graham outlived her brother by decades. Grant Wood died in 1942 of pancreatic cancer at 50 years old. Nan lived until 1990. For 60 years after the painting was made, she was the woman in American Gothic, recognized on the street, asked about the pitchfork, invited to give talks, consulted by art historians. She became, in a sense, the painting's caretaker and advocate, insisting on her brother's intentions, pushing back against readings she considered unfair, correcting the husband and wife mistake with an energy that never seemed to diminish. But she also said, on multiple occasions across those 60 years, that she wished she looked different in it, that she had not expected to be made severe, that the apron and the rickrack trim were her own, chosen from her own wardrobe, and that she had thought she was helping. That when she saw the results, she felt the painting had taken something from her face and replaced it with something else. Something that was recognizably her, and also, stubbornly, not. That feeling of being seen and misrepresented simultaneously, of your face being used to make a point you were not consulted about, is not incidental to the painting. It is, in some ways, what the painting is about. The figures in American Gothic are not allowed to be complicated. They have been flattened into a symbol before anyone bothered to ask what they actually were, what it is. American Gothic is a painting about the surface that is required of certain people in certain places. It is about how much a face can hold still while holding still. It is about the gap between what is performed and what is lived, which is a gap Grant Wood understood intimately and could not discuss directly, and which Nan Wood Graham felt acutely when she looked at what her face had become in her brother's hands. The argument the country has been having about this painting for 90 years, satire or celebration, mockery or tribute, coastal condescension or genuine homage, is a real argument, and I do not think it has a clean answer. Wood probably meant both because he was both, a man who loved where he was from and also understood the cost of being what he was there. What I keep returning to is the window behind them, the Carpenter Gothic arch. Wood drove past a house, stopped, and saw in that window something he needed to paint. He built the entire image around it. He found two people who could stand in front of it correctly. He assembled the composition with enormous deliberateness, and then he painted their faces still and unreadable and said it was a tribute. Maybe it was. Maybe the tribute was precisely to the stillness, to people who have learned to hold their faces and keep standing and let the window frame them and not say what is underneath. I'd love to know what you think. Did you always assume they were husband and wife? And does knowing that Grant Wood was almost certainly gay change what the blankness of those two faces means to you? Let me know in the comments.